The wrath of God. You know, when was that? Was it Friday? They had a drill. Was it Friday? Was it Friday? Last Friday, right? There was a disaster drill. It was pretty good, and obviously we're waiting for supposedly the big one that's about to hit Metro Manila. It's just a matter of time, they say, before the big one would hit us. And I remember we were just last Friday afternoon where I was swimming with my kids. Even the lifeguard said, sir, 4 o'clock, you have to leave the pool. We have a drill. So I ensured that me and my kids would leave, but Bambina and Santino took their time, and they hit 4 o'clock on the road. And he was telling me on the road they had to let all the cars stop. It was really, I think, a real drill. And if you ask yourself, what would be the worst natural disaster? So I googled it this morning. What was the worst natural disaster that ever happened in recorded mankind? And it happened in 1931 in China, when there was a great flood. And there were about almost 4 million people that died there. And that's a lot. 4 million people dead because of the flood. Now here in Genesis chapter 7, we see something that was never seen ever before Genesis 7. And we see something here that has never been seen after Genesis chapter 7. I mean, what happened here in Genesis chapter 7 is something unheard of. It's something that has no precedent before it. And the thing I realize nowadays is that Satan was able to infiltrate our minds in our church. Why do I say that? Normally, when you talk about Noah's Ark, it has a different context. Nowadays, Noah's Ark is lodged typically where? In Sunday schools. And there would be a lot of pictures of the ark and very cute elephants hanging their necks and giraffe, and it's in Sunday schools and nurseries and clinics of of pedia. And I think that's a very crafty thing for Satan to reposition it. Nowadays, as I said, diba, sin is now being repositioned, and sin is not called sin. Adultery now is called making love. And the worst and the most tragic event in the history of mankind has now been lodged as a nursery rhyme, a nursery song. The deadliest event in the history of mankind. No catastrophe, no natural or man-made disaster even comes close with the ugliness, with the horrifying, the tragic thing that ever happened here. It's worse than the president. I went in Washington D.C. and there's a museum there. It's the Holocaust Museum, wherein you would see the things that the Germans did to the Jews, how terrible they were. And I remember stepping out of that museum depressed. And you wouldn't have that in your Sunday school, right? The Holocaust memories. Yet, for some reason, Genesis chapter 7 lost its teeth. No one shivers when they talk about Noah's Ark. Maybe they think of happy thoughts. In fact, the tummies does not turn. Genesis chapter 7 now becomes a toothless lion. We have sanitized the wrath of God. We don't want to hear. We don't want to talk about the wrath of God. But it's part of the very character of God. In fact, the wrath, the anger, the fury of God is discussed more than the love of God. We have to recognize that the God that we love, the Abba Father whom we can run to, the Good Shepherd who would look for the lost sheep, is the same God that we will see today, who is a God of judgment and a God of wrath. Go to Genesis chapter 7, and we look at verse 1, and it says, Then the Lord said to Noah, Enter the ark, you and all your household, for you alone I have seen to be righteous before me in this time. You shall take with you of every clean animal by 7, a male and a female, and of the animals that are not clean 2, a male and a female, and all of the birds of the skies by 7, males and female, to keep offspring alive on the face of all the earth. For after 7 more days I will send rain on the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. And I will blot out from the face of the land every living thing that I have made. Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. As we learned, God's righteousness was imputed to Noah. There was nothing intrinsically good about Noah, only that God chose to love Noah. The righteousness of God was placed upon Noah. And this is proven by the obedience of Noah. How do we know if a person is genuinely saved? How do we know that a person is genuinely redeemed? We know that by the way they live. Noah was righteous, and that proves that God saved him. He was obedient to the commandments of God. And we've seen for 120 years, he was obedient. He was making the ark. Imagine obeying for 120 years, doing something that you really have no idea what it is, expecting something to come, which is a flood, wherein we know it has not rained then. Yet he was obedient. Not for a day, not for a week, not for a year, but for 120 years. That's long. To be obedient to God for a day is a challenge. For a week, it's almost an impossibility. Right? But I realized something. People that are genuinely saved will act like that. Obedience is not an act that we do. Obedience is who we are. It's not an act, it's a lifestyle. It's one thing for me to tell my son, be loving to your sister or love your sister. It's another thing for my son to be a loving person. A person can be unsaved and can still love, but only for a time. God does not tell you to love. He tells you to be a loving person. As I said, we are a new creation. That's not how we act, that's who we are. Because of the change that happened in me, I am now obedient. Not out of a requirement. It's just, it's like a sheep or a pig. A pig by nature would be dirty. It would always run to the mud. You don't have to teach a pig to go to the mud. Right? And if you try to train a pig to be clean and avoid the mud, yes, he can avoid the mud for a day, a week. But if you leave him alone, trust me, he will go back to the mud. What do you have to do? You have to put a new heart. You have to put a heart of a sheep in a pig. The moment you put a heart of a sheep in a pig, guess what? You don't even have to tell the pig not to go to the mud. It will not go to the mud. It is in his very nature not to go to a mud and roll there and play there. Obedience is not an act. Obedience is who we are. It is our lifestyle. And Noah proved it. He proved it. 120 years of obeying something that he does not understand. And he was hanging only on the Word of God. And that's our life. We should live our life that way simply because God said so. We don't need logic. We don't need reasoning. We don't need assurance from man. We just need the Word of God to tell us, to bid us. And we will follow. Why? Because God said so. I mean, He's God, right? Why will we not obey Him? He's God. Go to James chapter 1, please. James chapter 1 verse 22 says, "But prove yourself to be doers of the word." Come on. Prove yourself to be doers of the word and not mere hearers who delude themselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he immediately forgotten what kind of a person he was. But the one who looks intently at the perfect law, the law of liberty, and abides by it, not having become a forgetful hearer, but an effectual doer, this man will be blessed in what he does. We are not to be just hearers of the law, we are to be doers. I have a question. How do you know that you have learned a commandment of God? How do we know? Is it because you're able to recite it? Is it because you're able to quote it in what verse in the Bible that you can say that you learned the commandments and precepts of God? I submit, we can only say that we have learned the commandments of God when we have obeyed it. If you have not obeyed a commandment of God, you have not learned it yet. It's like saying, how can I know if you know how to drive? If I give my daughter a book on how to drive and she reads it and masters it, and she takes the test, she takes a written test and she aced the exams, does it mean that she knows how to drive? No. Unless she drives, then I will know she has learned how to drive. Unless we obey, we have never learned the commandment. Obedience is the proof that we have learned the commandments of God. And here we see Noah, faithful. And he was acting out the faithfulness. Noah was just acting out what God was to him. God was faithful to him. Therefore, he is faithful to his God. It's who he is. 120 years. But I realize nowadays that there is a problem. There is a problem in our church. There's a problem with society nowadays.